Volume 5 C36. Albedo rarely chose to act herself, at least not directly. Not unless she had a particular target which she could trust to no other. But with the riot still in full swing 2 days later, she knew that if she sent her servants, they had a high probability of not coming back. With the doppelgangers stretched thin guiding rioters, and herself unwilling to permit her 2 mortal servants into Nazarick until their work was done, she chose to gather a few supplies herself. This proved quite simple as the doppelgangers rose to positions of leadership in various factions of the coalescing mob. She held out a painted rock with the inverted symbol of the Holy Kingdom. "Rations for 3, she said when she reached the window of the thoroughly sealed building. There were peasants in lax stances wearing bloody and battered armor clearly not meant for them. They leaned against the wall holding halberds, pikes, spears, with no particular rhyme or reason to who was stationed where." Albedo glanced out of the corner of her eye. Some of the peasants who walked with exceptional swaggers in their steps showed why. The looted houses of nobles resulted in slapdash torn-up fashions to intact dresses, but with almost equal brutality. Hatred and revenge were worn as skirts. Women who participated in the slaughter, seemingly eager to display their bloody hatred of the corruption they saw in the heights of power, went an extra mile beyond their menfolk. Seen worn in the form of the scalped heads with long hair still attached and sewn into a form of twisted dresses. Long silken strands of golden hair, auburn hair, once part of beautiful or well-adorned women of high status to display their wealth, were now reduced to a fashion statement. Bodies of slaughtered officials were still not cleaned up as the mob began to make the final pushes on the last soldiers holding out in isolated corners of the city. The scent of blood and pride was such that Albedo couldn't help herself. She took in deep, happy breaths, inhaling it through her nostrils and not even bothering to suppress the excitement of their decadent corruption and what it did to her nethers. The peasant responding to her request was hard-pressed to do anything but stare at her while she was distracted. A few howls of pain in the distance brought fresh tingles to the demon, and somewhere far away, cheers meant another victory for the mad mob. Fools. Mere animals, they have no sense of control, they need the supreme being or they will never be worth anything at all. She snorted and recalled the animals that dared strike her master in the past. Fools leading fools, killing fools, doing foolish things. As she thought of her longed-for master, her heart ached. For month after month, she worked alone in the Holy Kingdom. Her steady progress went back to Nazarick in the form of reports, each of which she kissed and caressed to leave her scent behind. So many nights she lay in bed and sought his mind in the night to give him the only thing she could. A blissful dream. Yet not once had he summoned her to his bed. Even though she knew he now had a male member and could have her as a man could have the woman he loved. Yet still he hadn't expressed a desire to lie with her. The train of thought brought her to the depths of despair, her eyes filled with tears, all the world ceased to be as she struggled in her heart to find peace and patience. "My beloved. My precious lord, you wanted me to love you above all others. Why won't you let me show you?" she asked with hopeless, silent longing. After months of work, despite him being a mere gate spell away, she had not been brought home. The thought that troubled her most was, does he think he made a mistake? Am I a mistake? Could he actually not feel for me what I feel for him? Am I not desirable in his eyes at all? Was changing me a form of torture designed to make me suffer for some slight he has yet to reveal? Did I fail? Am I unworthy? Am I supposed to love, and not be loved in return? Thinking any one of those thoughts guaranteed the rise of the others, and it in turn made her oblivious to the world around her. She mechanically took the canvas bag of supplies and left the area to go back to her headquarters. She didn't notice that the peasant working there began sobbing uncontrollably, or that those who passed near when her thoughts overwhelmed her, sat beside the street and fell to the same sobbing that was trapped inside her own mind. When she returned to the shared space, she tossed the canvas bag to Skana, whose bright smile vanished immediately. "My lady?" she asked, her eyes filling with empathetic tears as Albedo's sorrow became her own. "Are you thinking about him again?" the peasant asked. She set the bag down, ignoring the growling of her belly and allowing Ileana to quietly approach and take the supplies to start working with them. In any other circumstances, Albedo would have snapped, "Mind your place, insect. Or what business is it of yours?" or even lashed out with violence. But with none from Nazarick to speak to, not even the vampire whore, and any request to return home feeling wrong while her work was unfinished, there were no others. However, as she looked the auburn-haired peasant over, her bright, shimmering green eyes, so full of guile with her own kind, were guileless with her, empty of anything other than loyalty and devotion. And it didn't hurt that what Albedo wanted was to converse with a woman who might understand. Why hasn't he summoned me to his bed? You know our magic can take me home in an instant. He could have me for a night and return me here without missing even a meal. But here I am, Albedo said, and flopped down in a chair before resting her arm on the table and drumming her fingers. The sounds of agonizing deaths in the distance and the previously observed proof of atrocity rendered meaningless in the face of her unfulfilled love. Skarna sat on the floor at the feet of her lady. Without thinking, Albedo sat her feet in the human's lap, and Skarna moved not an inch. I've dealt with a lot of shy men. Either they think they're doing something wrong, or they like their own sex, or they're insecure, or they're not attracted to the woman, or their male parts don't work right. I guess the last doesn't apply, huh? Albedo was torn between bemusement and outrage before settling upon bemusement thanks to the rueful smirk formed by the thin-lipped human female. And he likes girls, you know that much, right? Skarna asked and removed Albedo's white sandals. As she began to massage the feet of her lady, Albedo wiggled her toes and nodded. Yes, I can say that with confidence. The succubus had no doubts on that front. He touched her in the ways of one who felt desire, want, and hunger. She had no doubt of his preference. Even when he had only a skeletal body, he was very clearly fond of the opposite sex. So, either he's insecure, not attracted to you, or he thinks he's doing something wrong. Skarna snorted at her words. My lady is a succubus. Beautiful. Desirable. Anyone capable of lust. They would trade their souls to have you in their arms. She began to breathe a little harder and worked her fingers with greater vigor into the soles of her lady's feet, bending and twisting them using all her skills to make the attempt at relaxing the demoness a pleasing one. Albedo did not miss what Skarna said, or the throaty noise of want in another woman, but chose not to indulge it directly. You're very observant, human. Thank you, my lady, Skarna said and cleared her throat as she brought herself under control. When Skarna was successful, she went on, so that means he is either insecure, or he thinks he is doing something wrong. If he's insecure, you'd need to make him confident. Praise works well for that, and maybe he is. Even great men, especially great men, can be uncertain. The very fact that they are great means they're observant enough to think about how they could be better. When that's what they're like, they can worry about not being better, you know. But I kinda doubt that's the thing. Maybe it could be too. But if I can guess, it's 'cause he thinks he's wrong. How do you conclude that, peasant? Albedo narrowed her eyes down at the former prostitute, dancer, and sometime merchant. On account of you're here, a long way away. Like, Skarna grimaced as she tried to think things through, and moved her attention to the right foot of her lady. Like, sure, magic can get you back quick, but you are still far away, okay? So people put bad temptations as far from themselves as possible so they don't give in. There was a girl I was chasing once. She was married, but she wanted me and I wanted her. But on account of her being married, she avoided me. She went with her husband to town even though most wives stayed home. She worked on the far side of the fields. At village festivals she wouldn't drink in sight of me. Didn't work though, Skarna said with a smug grin on her face and a lascivious licking of her lips. How did you get her? Albedo asked with morbid and lewd curiosity both at once. There was a rumor I seduced her husband. It wasn't true, but she got real angry about that and came to my house. Now I didn't like her husband. He used to hit her when he drank. I got standards, you know? But she still didn't like that, and she had a big black eye where he hit her when she confronted him. I took care of her black eye, said I'd never do anything with a man what does that kind of thing to a person they're supposed to love. I got her cozy, comforted her, told her it was okay to want to feel good. Once she didn't feel it was wrong, we kissed and we liked the taste. That's how it begins, always with a kiss. Skarna licked her lips and let out a little pretty laugh. From behind her, she heard the soft voice of Ileana. What happened when the husband found out? Skarna looked over her shoulder at the sylvan woman who steadily stirred a stewpot over a crackling flame. The human's face became grave and serious. He beat her up pretty bad. But then, something funny happened. Skarna scratched her head. He went out hunting one day and then just didn't come back. It's right dangerous in them woods, you know. There's wolves, bears, who knows what kind of monsters. Never did find his body neither, like he vanished into thin air. Skarna snapped her finger and her face became all smiles. Maybe the gods didn't much like him beating on his wife and took him for judgment, for all anyone else knows. I took care of the wife though, got her back on her feet when we couldn't pay for a healer to come out to the village, and she was my woman for about a year before she got another farm boy and a kid from him after that. So I guess things worked out. Skarna's enjoyment of recounting the story seemed all but boundless, but Ileana had a little frown. Weren't you sad when she got another person and left you? The elf asked, and Skarna shook her head a little, and looked back down at Albedo's feet while she finished working on them. Nah, not really. I started whoring around that time, and we don't get those pretty endings. Besides, I can't even imagine what kind of person I'd want to settle down with. She chuckled with derision. They'd have to be one in a bigger number of people than I can name, like one in a kingdom, for me to even think about it. I see, Ileana said and ladled stew into bowls which she brought over to the table. She bowed her head to her demonic savior while laying it down within the demon's reach. Though my fare is simple, I have given it all my devotion, my lady. I pray that makes up for my lack of refinement. She then handed a bowl down to Skarna. Here you go, enjoy, she said with a gentle little grin before going and retrieving a third bowl for herself. Anyway, Lady Albedo, if the only real problem is he thinks he's wrong for wanting you, just get him to see that he's not. A little liquor, sweet words, and show him that the real wrong is not being happy. That's like the worst wrong ever. Let it, and this world'll take every bit of happiness away and leave you sad all the time, so show him how happy you both could be, and that it's all right, and he'll be yours. Albedo quietly reflected on that and the trio ate in silence thereafter, with none really looking at the other. Volume 5 C37. The Queen of Frost walked over the field of battle, or what she was fairly sure the histories would describe as a battlefield. But the truth was, this was a massacre. The bodies of the Batfolk were more numerous than she expected. Their powerful leaps made them vulnerable to arrows and spat stones, while their preference for spears without shields made them easy prey for the tight formations of the Orc tribes. The green fist survivors that she used as bait would be incorporated into her kingdom, with their chief and his core of supporters dead. For good measure Naya intended to break up the tribe into subgroups of others, ensuring that they would blend in like blood on fox fur and disappear as they assimilated. Ahead of her, across the field, the last holdouts of the Batfolk were rallied around the Grand King Bissa. Thalran? Naya said as her formation spread out in the crane wing formation to surround the last position of the goatman. Yes, my queen? He asked, rushing over to kneel before her. How are they holding out this long? Are my soldiers unwilling to get close to him? Naya asked. The bodies of most of the Batfolk were in clumps and clusters. Their tribal warfare led their people into danger for glory, which made them easily trapped and killed off, and ironically drawing other glory-hungry fools eager to prove themselves, to the same end. He looked up at the white-haired woman with her ice-blue eyes. Her talons were extended out and the light of the day made her of white, almost blue skin gleam like an angel. My queen, he has the Sunder skill. He destroys weapons when he hits them. It makes him very difficult to approach. Also his bodyguards are powerful warriors, and they have a small hasty fortification of carts to help keep us from getting too close. I see, Naya said and looked over her shoulder. Her own bodyguards were now comprised of notable warriors from multiple races. Vijayarajendala's Zoroastrian cavalry proved an effective flanking force when properly anchored by infantry, and Naya's promise of securing his lands and a position of authority over other beastmen, along with a reminder that he was stuck on the ground while Olisar Dark, her Maelus, and her Terapus were not, sealed the deal. Greatness or destruction was an easy choice, and with each race having some vulnerability she could exploit. Day by day, her coalition grew. But the Batfolk resisted. Surrounded, shot by stones, having poisoned darts dropped from above, arrows launched at them, and the Orc hordes with iron discipline surrounding them, and still Bissa would not give in. And now the field was filled with dead Batfolk, perhaps half the united tribe, not counting their pregnant females, their old, their young, and the few warriors who made it back to the Grand King's position. With this victory, what remained of the Abelian hills would almost surely fall into her hands. The smell of blood was thick in the air, and Olisar Dark's shadow swept over Naya's body before she saw it begin a slow, circling descent. The last holdouts of the Bafok were some 2 kilometers away at their encampment, too far even for her to hear the fighting. Naya rubbed her head where she felt the ridge still forming. His blood isn't done with me, more and more, I'm losing what made me human. How far will this go? She asked, at once ashamed of the twinge of unhappiness at losing what she was, and grateful, even proud, for what the frost dragon did for her. When he landed at last, she held out a hand, and touched his scales. When she was a human, it felt cool to the touch, but now, it felt more alive, warm in its own way, while others like the orcs, their flesh seemed almost burning by comparison. I checked the area beyond. For some reason, the last 3 tribes have fallen into chaos. They won't be sending aid to the Bafok. No other warriors are in sight. He stands alone. Olisardak said, and Naya caressed his face. My friend, thank you, she said, and meant it in every way she could. If you don't mind, could you carry me to the last stronghold of the Bafok? I'll see Bissa myself. With this, assuming the last don't pose a problem, we should be able to open up trade with the Dark Dwarves and even the Dark Elves. That trade will bring unimaginable wealth in goods to my new kingdom. There's only one real obstacle left, and I'd like to remove it myself if I can. Olisardak lowered his head to the ground and allowed the Queen of Frost to climb up and sit behind his head. The pulsing power of her dread-giving eyes had only grown since her transformation, and as such, carrying her felt proper. Though he could not explain her uncommon luck. As he took off into the air and her army continued to march toward the last holdouts to ensure there was no escape or shift of fortunes, he thought that over. While not all her luck has been good, it's all come out in her favor again, and again, and again. The sudden disappearance of several demi-human chiefs and champions creating conflicts that weakened her neighbors before her coming is almost like a divinely given blessing. I wonder if she is holding out information from me? He considered it a near certainty that the Queen of Frost had somehow arranged for the deaths or disappearances of several champions, but from his own time as a ruler he knew better than to outright ask about it. Even if she did, she would deny it, even to me. Her mention of the Dark Dwarves and trade had him curious as well. The dwarves I know are master builders, craftsmen of notable skill. In retrospect, forcing them to unite with the Quagoans would have been much, much wiser. It was another failure of foresight in his mind that brought great bitterness to his heart. Perhaps it would have changed nothing when he was confronted by Yaldabaoth, but there was no way to know now that the past was past. He turned his mind to the task at hand, keeping his eyes sharp and on the lookout. From up above, the creatures fighting so urgently below were mere ants. Behind him he could already hear the crows coming to feast on the dead from both sides. Birds are the winners of every battle. He thought with a sense of irony as their calls to their brethren grew louder as ever more joined in the feast which Queen Baraha and King Bissa provided to them. Up ahead over a low-rising hill, he caught sight of the improvised fortification. A ring of thick carts protecting multiple tents, the Bafok warriors fought from what passed for improvised high ground, protected by cart walls. At a single entrance the largest of the goatmen fought with vigor. Weapons shattered and Queen Baraha's warriors would fall back to be replaced with others. Taught to preserve their lives rather than throw them away, they withdrew, albeit reluctantly, to the mocking calls of the Bafok king. Instead he found himself dealing with a newly thrust spear, and his wearying bodyguards struggled to hold the line. Olisardak was quick to make a suggestion. Should I use my breath on them? No, Naya shouted over the wind that battered and roared against her body. I think I can handle this one myself. It looks like the stories are true, he really can sunder weapons, but that seems to be his whole routine. Go ahead and descend into the camp, I'd rather take their last warriors alive if I can. As the dragon's shadow alerted them to his coming by its darkness sweeping over them during the light of the fading day, both sides paused to look up. Naya couldn't help but notice the bright green armor. I really like that armor, she thought at last when Olisardak touched ground with an earth-shaking roar and the Queen of Frost leapt down from his back. Grand King Bissa. Naya called out, the battle is over, your army is defeated. Submit, and you and the rest of your people will live. She held out a hand to allow him to come and offer supplication. He turned to face her. In the moment that her army seemed to cease its attempts, a brief respite was his, and his warriors took it gratefully, allowing their spear tips to lower to the ground. The goatman let out a steamy snort from his nostrils. I have a better idea. You submit to me. You're not in a position to make that suggestion, Naya said as the two crossed the open ground between each other. He looked like hell. He'd clearly been using his Sunder skill a great deal. He was breathing hard, and despite his bravado, he was in far from the best shape. By contrast, Nia was breathing easy, relaxed, rested, and it showed. Huntress of the Wildlands, Queen of Demi-Humans. You did defeat my tribe, but as long as I am on these two hooves, he stomped them on the ground and huffed again, leveling his sword at her. I will never submit to you, a crossbreed of human and non-human, a creature of muddied blood. Rejecting you was the smartest thing the humans ever did. Nia narrowed her eyes, the fullness of her fiery gaze, the icy hatred, the raw loathing and murderous intent poured out of her pupils and into the face of the demi-human that stood twice her height and dared insult her being. Then that is all there is to say, Grand King. When I kill you, I will spare your people and make them mine, then they will become greatness, and you will be forgotten. Nia spat cold spit into the churned-up dirt, and without another word, the Bafok King charged. Nia's bow was out and she put mana into her shot. The arrows loosed faster than she had ever used them as a human, but the Grand King's sword flashed out, batting most of them aside. He ignored the explosive burst of mana and the pathetic damage it caused. Archers are easy, get in close and... The pain hit his throat, though he didn't see what caused it until the blinding flash ceased to affect his eyes. The Dragonid Queen had gone on the offensive. When his sword battered away her arrow, her talons came out and she jumped into his arms like a child eager to embrace her father. Only instead, her talons dug into the fur and fleshy hide where the armor met his neck, and her mouth. He caught a glimpse of it before it clamped down on the flesh at his cheek, tearing and rending so that his blood knew the touch of air. He howled in pain, dropped his sword, and grabbed her small body with both hands to tear her away. The sharp fangs of her teeth carried his flesh and blood with it, as did her talon-like fingernails, but little by little, he pulled her loose and threw her back. She spat chunks of him into the ruined ground between their feet, and she drew her bow again. Mana-infused arrows pricked like pins as she began to run. Blood pumped out, and he snatched up his weapon to attack one-handed again. But without a ranged weapon of his own, he was forced to run or leap. And he was weary. She led him on a chase, her laughter mocking him and driving him to charge with ever greater recklessness. The pinpricks that hit his limbs began to slow him down, and he started to take them seriously, avoiding or deflecting them until she ran out of arrows and threw her bow aside. It slid along the bloody ground and the two charged at one another. Her talons raked along his body as she came in close, inside the reach of his sword. His great size made a massive target, and it was difficult to use his sword. But he still had his other hand, and while droplets of his blood scattered and splattered about, he bore the wounds until he finally got what he sought. He grabbed her wrist, squeezed it tight enough to draw a snarl of pain from the Queen of Frost, and hauled her bodily off her feet so that she dangled, hung by her arm above the ground. "You are mine," he shouted as he held the slender little dragonid aloft, but her pulsing horrifying stare never wavered. He raised his sword overhead to bring it down and cleave her in two at the shoulder. Lesser strength, fortress, dragonskin. Nia activated her martial arts. Her other hand went up and snatched his sword arm at the wrist and held firm. Then her talons closed in on the tendons, pierced the nerves, and tore them out. Sudden agony shot through the Grand King, and he released his hold on her in shock. No sooner than her feet touched the ground than she jumped into his chest again. Gripping his throat with her fingers facing opposite directions, she pierced the flesh, and tore it open. The Grand King of the Bafok toppled backwards, not with a roar, not with a bellow, but with a disbelieving gurgle. Confusion filled his once fierce eyes as his life's blood poured out into the dirt, and with its departure, he died at last. Nia rose. The Grand King Bissa has been slain by Nia Baraha, Queen of Frost. Surrender, and your lives will be spared, she announced as the drums of her larger force became far more audible, and the little ring of wooden carts was further surrounded from the outside. The stillness of their disbelief continued for several seconds as the fallen giant of a Bafok was simply stared at by those waiting for him to rise up to his hoofs again. But as he failed to rise and the moment stretched out, one by one the Bafok cast down their spears with anger and disbelief, or let them simply slip from their fingers in despair. They made a low bleating-like noise of mourning as the world they knew ended, and a new, unfamiliar one began. Thalrin made his way into the remnants, while the orcs bound Bafok prisoners in thick ropes for the Queen's final judgment, and knelt before the Queen of Frost. "Majesty, there's nothing left but Bladers, the Va'an, and the Spriggans." If we send word for peace, give good promises, they will submit. Champions or chiefs are dead there, they will destroy themselves, they know this. They will not fight you. What about the Bafok settlements? Naya asked while the last Bafok warriors were led out of sight after being bound. Thalrin thought that over, and while he did, Naya crouched down, picked up the armor at the shoulders, and began to haul it off the fallen Bafok champion-in-chief. She set it down, shimmied out of her more crude chainmail armor, and then slid Bissa's green-colored armor on instead. She felt it conform to her body as only magic armor could do. Yes, that feels right somehow, like I belong in this. Naya thought and sighed with contentment. They have almost no one left to defend. We show captives, they submit, we show Bissa's head, they swear loyalty. They cannot stop you now. You are Queen of Abelian Hills, Thalrin said with a reverential, hushed tone that fairly compelled him to his knees. No. We will give it a better name. The Abelian Hills is a name humans gave it, they don't and won't respect it as its own kingdom if we keep the name they gave us. Naya shook her head, that is the way of humans, to name it, is to own it. Sort of. This will be. Naya thought about it and picked up the sword once held in Bissa's hands. She rested it on her open palm and looked down at the long weapon. It had taken many lives, that much she was sure of. Many lives from many demi-human races over the years of war. We will call this land, where all demi-humans may belong, the Kingdom of Demalbion, and it will be a haven for non-humans. We will make it strong, we will make it great. And nobody will take it from us, Naya said, and hearing her words, the army began to cheer while the birds continued their echoing calls of approval, feasting with glee on the gift of death from the Queen of Frost. She handed the sword off to Thalrin. Keep it, a gift to commemorate your hard work for me, first of my demi-human followers. This victory wasn't mine, this was ours. All orcs, stone spitters, and the rest, deserve praise for this day. My queen. He accepted the gift of the blade with reverence, bowing his head, and then raising it up overhead, his large maw opened and his deep-set eyes filled with devotion, he bellowed out his praise. Kingdom of Demalbion ours. Frost Queen ours. Victory, ours. Hail Frost Queen. Hail Kingdom. The call went up, and as it did, Olisardak nudged at Naya with his snout. You're off to a good start, he said under his breath. Aye, she said, glancing back to meet his eyes, but any good sword arm can build a kingdom, the hard part is ruling it. Olisardak, recalling the loss of his own and the very limited progress he made despite years of effort, did not disagree. Though it didn't make either of them enjoy the moment of triumph and cheers any less before they went to finish the last remnants off. One way or another. Volume 5 C38. Gustave Montagnier stood looking at the ruined village. Smoke still rose up from the ruins which the elves left behind. The bodies were in a sorry state of affairs. The wrath of the slaves had been turned on men, women, children, old and young. All of them bound to stakes, all of them filled with arrows. They turned them into target practice, he said while Kellett stood at his side. The same as the last 4 villages, she said while her soldiers cut the bodies free to let them crumple into dead heaps onto the dirt. At least they aren't hitting towns yet, Gustave said with a grimace. A few paces away several soldiers were busy digging a mass grave to dump the naked bodies of the villagers into. Yet, she retorted, it won't be long. They collapsed the mines, remember, those employed a lot of very strong slaves. If they keep at it, they'll have enough strength to hit towns soon, and we're hard-pressed to stop them. We can't guard everywhere, but they can raid anywhere. It was a mistake to let the South engage in this trade with the theocracy, Gustave said and spat into the bloody mud churned up by fighting, bleeding, and recent rain. We just brought our enemies home to us, and now look. As if to follow his own orders, he looked at the broken and toppled shells of what used to be human peasant huts. They were blackened from fire and mostly toppled, only the skeletons of the homes remained standing, if anything at all. In a few cases, only the door frames. The crops were burned in the fields, and if you were to take a guess, many were taken as well for the elven rebels to eat. So how do you think they did it this time? Kellett asked. Gustave pointed to the distant fields. I would guess that they started a fire in the fields, got people to come running to put it out, and then hit the village and the young rushed to douse the fires at the same time. Divide them both, kill them both. That's my guess anyway, since some of the bodies in the fields had buckets with them. We need to catch them. Kellett pointed out. All right, Gustav said with scathing sarcasm and a steady unblinking glare at the advisor to the Queen, let's just chase the elves into the great forest. That will surely have no drawbacks whatsoever. It isn't as if they don't have centuries of experience in combat in those conditions. And when we get there, we can cut our own throats and create a flood of blood to drown them all. She stared back at him and flicked back her long chestnut brown hair. Fine. Point taken. Gustav slumped at the shoulders with her concession. He heard the thud of a body being tossed into the hole. Another thud followed after it. If we can't catch them, maybe we can. I don't know. Confine them. He pointed out, if we establish a series of forts and keep patrols outside the forests, we should be able to minimize any damage that they can do and slowly wear them down. Kellett thought that forts were not expensive, the elves did not have massive armies, and all they needed to do was protect the villagers and deter elven attack. It made sense. I'll bring it up to the lords who have land around here. It took weeks of haranguing the local lords and explaining that they would have to prepare some security responsibilities of their own, along with one arrogant lord's slaughtered expedition into the forest, to convince them that Gustav and Kellett were correct. But little by little, forts began to appear and the southern Holy Kingdom's peasants were taught how to man and defend them, along with each being provided with a dozen or so trained soldiers to help man and maintain these small positions. Further, the mounted knights of the various lords began to ride out on the fringes to look for elven activity. Mines continued to fall, places that had any sizable elven slave population suffered attack. But the troubles began to drop off. Which is why Gustav and Kellett toasted their success in the dining hall of a local duke, their feet propped up on the table, leaned back with contented smiles. The problem was not completely solved as the elves still held the forests, but the threat was removed nonetheless. The frothing beer was a tad warm on the tongue, but the mug was big, heavy, and above all, full. They drank deeply and faced one another. Gustav's face was flushed red beneath his bushy brown beard as he said in an almost festive voice, now all we need to do is get this tax situation taken care of and we can head home. They should have no further issues paying what they owe to the crown, and if they object at this point, then they're just in rebellion, and we'll need to use the force we brought for show. Kellett responded, her face was more serious, her lips drawn into a thin line after consuming a deep draught, and then split into a smile. While it was possible, and she considered it more likely than Gustav did, she didn't think it much more likely. Until. Do you think Kellett and Gustav have gotten word of what happened yet? Queen Kalkar asked. Her brother sat opposite herself and beside the bedridden Remedios. Days of travel over open roads were peaceful once the capital was out of sight, though the plumes of smoke continued to be a blight against the blue sky and the eyes of the Queen. Now, safely in Kalincha, they had the security of an armed force, walls, a more stable and loyal population, and Gotza was leading a force to reclaim the capital. A force that Remedios doubted was enough. It's hard to say, my queen, but the mob will surrender on their own, I'm sure. They have to, they don't want to risk harming. Remedios snapped her mouth shut as she spoke when Kalkar's brother interjected. Shut up, he spat at her. Not everybody believes in my sister's sense of justice as you do, Remedios. They don't value human lives as you do, and that is how we ended up in this mess in the first place. He slammed his fist on the table where he sat, and Kalkar jumped a little in her seat. Caspon's long, rich blonde hair was not in its finest state at that moment. The stress had clearly gotten to him, and when he saw his sister's reaction, he forced himself to relax. Sister. I'm sorry, but as much as I share your beliefs, we simply can't avoid the reality in front of us. Our brothers are scattered all over the place, the royal family isn't united, the South is withholding taxes, and now we've lost the capital, while the army that could easily retake it is engaged with events in the South. I still can't believe the elven slaves are demanding a separate homeland for themselves in the South. Enslaving them was a mistake, they should have been killed instead. Remedios chimed in again. Kalkar wrung her hands in her lap. It's all this corruption, I don't understand it. But I don't need to, do I? Sister? Caspond asked. She snapped her eyes up to her brothers, their clear family connection never more obvious than then. I can't do things the way I did them. Emperor Jerkniv had a problem with lazy and corrupt nobles. He got rid of it by getting rid of them. We can do the same. My soldiers, people who gave their lives to me, died saving my life and getting me out. We're going to retake the capital by any means necessary, and then conduct a purge. Every single official in the northern and southern Holy Kingdom, every single noble family, without exception, will be audited. Every single corrupt individual will be purged. The labor lost in the south with the rebellion of the elves will be replaced with them. My queen Remedios opened her mouth, and kept it open when Kalka, with tears in her eyes and one fist clenched, slapped her across the face. This is your doing also. Kellet told me the truth. And you go and confirm it. And you too, brother. What point is there to a kingdom of laws that has no laws that the rulers respect? Bribing juries, blackmailing judges, threatening people with lives in their hands? Remedios rubbed her cheek as if she couldn't believe the stinging pain, and the Holy Queen raged on. The one you had condemned had a good reputation for protecting people, for saving lives. Maybe what she did was wrong, but that clear corruption rubbed everybody the wrong way. What did you think was going to happen? How can I be trusted by the people when you act in my name to show that I can't be trusted? The Holy Queen spat the words out with such violent anger that spittle flew from her lips to land on Remedios' cheek, and the resurrected paladin could only lay there and take it. I was trying to protect people too, she said in a small, childlike voice. Sympathizers with the demi-humans are too dangerous to leave alive. Spare one today, they'll kill tomorrow. Non-humans have to die, it's that simple. There's no other way for us to be safe. There's nothing fair about a human child dying by a demi-human claw, so there can be nothing fair about getting rid of the ones who help demi-humans. Kalka sat heavily in her chair with an audible thump. We're going to set all this to rights, she said and pointed at Remedios, and you are going to help me, and you are going to follow my orders in both letter and spirit. Do you understand me, Remedios Custodio? Kalka seethed with outrage, recalling the soldier dragged from his horse and the hate-filled peasant's eyes as a spear pierced the mouth of the valiant warrior. So much suffering, brought down by people with no real sense of justice. I have to fix all of this. But I'm going to need help to do it. I can't do it all on my own. The queen cursed her ill luck, and Remedios gave a slow nod. Yes, my queen. My sword is always yours, I swear it. That's a start, the Holy Queen said, and then rang the bell to call for a servant. At that moment, all she really wanted was a strong drink. Her capital may have been denied her, but a drink at least would not be. Volume 5 C39. Gustav and Kellet listened with alarm. What do you mean that Hobens has fallen? Hobens can't fall? Kellet shouted as she shot to her feet. Gustav's hand reflexively went to his sword, but he held his fist tightly clenched around the hilt, the leather squeaking in the tense grip of his slowly twisting hand. It's us that let this happen. We did this, our corruption, our attempt to do good by way of evil. They lost their faith in us, and what is a kingdom if not the faith of the people in it? He cursed himself while sweat formed on his brow, his heart pounded and ached, his eyes squeezed tight shut as he heard the woman scream in pain as she was murdered atop the wall. It was no longer an execution in his mind. It was murder. I had her murdered. I knew it was wrong. I knew Remedios had done something. The peasant knew, everybody knew, and while looking into the eyes of my commander, I pronounced the sentence. Maybe she would have been found guilty anyway, but maybe not? Nobody can know now. He was lost in his guilt and dismay while Kellet continued to shout at the page boy who knelt and relayed the message. Forget the taxes, we have to get back to Hobens now, Kellet exclaimed and put a hand on Gustav's shoulder to bring him back to reality. He nodded numbly. Is the Holy Queen, is she alive? What about my sister? Kellet asked, then a half a second later, and the prince? She added belatedly without a glance at Gustav, her eyes riveted on the kneeling, trembling boy in the blue and white uniform with the royal crest on the center. A all alive when word was passed to me. F fled to Kalincha. I left while they were on the R road. The Queen commands that the royal army return to the capital city and take it back. F from the M mob, my lady. The boy stammered a lot, his youthful face a deep red flush of uncertainty at their reactions. Right. Right, of course, thanks be to the gods. Kellet sighed and rested a hand over her heart. Then we need to go. We can't waste an hour. Gustav, how quickly can you get the army ready? Within the hour, but we shouldn't ignore the funds. The damage to Hobens will be enormous. We can't forget that. If we do, we'll just invite the same riots again when the army leaves. and I can promise the Southern Holy Kingdom will find an excuse not to pay while Hobens is damaged," Gustav pointed out. Kellett frowned and rubbed her temple, forcing herself to calm down. "Fine. Fine, we'll leave a sixth of the army to collect what we can while we take the main force back. Nobody will want to spark an outright rebellion over this." "You're probably right," Gustav noted, not with the ongoing elf problem. With that said and done, they got moving. "See you at the head of the army in an hour then. This is going to be a long road back," Kellett said with dread. A dread Gustav shared. Albedo listened to the doppelganger with glee in her heart. The royal army was relatively undermanned, being composed only of the garrisons of Kalinsha and other fortifications in the immediate area. She shivered, her wings trembling with excitement, her yellow eyes bright at the faceless doppelganger that explained what was sighted from the walls. "Can the mob fend them off?" Albedo demanded, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Yes, my lady, but it is likely that they will draw on other garrisons, and they may have powerful heroes whom the peasants cannot fend off without our help. What should we do?" the doppelganger asked, cocking his head to one side. Even from down on one knee he could not resist a dramatic gesture or tone of voice, exaggerating the question greatly and spreading his arms out as if to embrace the guardian overseer. Albedo was now used to their over-the-top performances. Perhaps Pandora's actor behaves as he does because of his race rather than by design? Albedo wondered but had no certainty behind her thoughts. At least being used to it now, she no longer rolled her eyes. "It's time for the city to fall. We need the tipping point." "How far away is the royal army headed by Gustav and Kellett?" 3 weeks. The doppel answered. "Help the defenses hold until then, after that, cause their collapse, but in the days before that, make the royal army angry. Make them angry and frightened, and make sure word of what is done because the queen lost the capital, is carried south." The doppelganger exclaimed his devotion with an elaborate act of rising to his feet to make a deep, sweeping bow. "Of course, my lady." When the doppelganger was gone, Skarna and Ileana approached. "So my lady." Skarna prompted, and when the pair knelt, Albedo nodded her acknowledgement. "Yes?" Albedo asked, resting the side of her head in her palm while her arm was propped up at the elbow on the table. "What's going to happen up on the wall?" Skarna asked with a brief, wary glance out the window to the distant stones where the mob still patrolled. "Some mild atrocities. This city is going to fall, and be reminded that this is a kingdom. They don't get a choice of ruler. The few surviving government officials and soldiers will be slaughtered in front of their comrades, painfully, to provoke an attack and retribution." With that, Albedo snapped her fingers. "The corruption of this kingdom will be thrown into the flames and extinguished. The Southern Holy Kingdom will rise in rebellion out of fear of the Queen as she will become, and a new world for this land will be born in blood and pain. Humans die, lots of them. Right, Lady Albedo?" Ileana asked, licking her lips and still darting nervous glances outside. "It may not be lots, but by the end of it, let us just say that the humans will regret their mistreatment of you and your kind, Ileana." Albedo chuckled with malice, and the elf prostitute cast herself at Albedo's feet with her arms outstretched and her forehead to the floor. "I never dreamed that I would live to see my race avenged, not even in all the years of my lifetime. But in barely half a year I have seen, or will see, all of that and more. I'm yours, for your bed, for your sustenance, for your service, for all the years of my life, no matter how old I live to be," Ileana cried out with sobs of joy that wet the floor. Her golden hair lay scattered about, and Albedo glanced from the elf to the human. "Aren't you going to rededicate yourself to me?" the demoness asked with a bit of bemusement at the quiet prostitute, and Skarna turned her eyes from the window and back to her lady. "My lady, I'm a peasant," Skarna reminded her mistress. She smirked up at the demon. "I don't say a lot less somebody wants me to, but what I do say, I mean. I can say it twice, but it won't mean more on account of I meant every word the first time. I'm your woman, course. If you do want the bed, you'd be the prettiest girl I've ever slept with, demon or not." She winked and gave her lady a lascivious lick of the lips, and at this Albedo could only draw a hand down her face and groan. "I am not very fond of humans. But of all your traits, never knowing what you will say next at least keeps you from being absolutely dull." The demoness giggled a bit. "For now though, we wait, and we watch.